تسمية النائب الأستاذ تمام سلام.
Good afternoon and thank you for joining us on FutureTV. I'm Linda Tamim and these are today's top stories. Tamam Slam is nominated Lebanon's Prime Minister designate after receiving 124 votes in the two-day parliamentary consultations. Syrian President Bashar al-Assad warns the fall of his regime would destabilize the region for decades. And Western nations enter second and final day on nuclear talks with Iranian delegates. Tamam Slam has become Lebanon's Prime Minister designate after receiving 124 votes in the two-day parliamentary consultations as Lebanon's parties started looking ahead to government formation. Salam said the type of cabinet he would form will be defined in light of the consultations that will be held next Tuesday and Wednesday. During an interview with Al Jamhuriya newspaper, the PM designate added he does not have the illusion that he will do miracles and said he wants to partner with all those who gave him their trust for his premiership. Salam also said he will be open-minded with all parties and voiced the importance of agreeing on a new electoral law that pleases everyone. Although Tamam Slam was nominated by most of the country's deputies, parties across Lebanon's political divide are not in unison over the formation of the government. March 8th's main Christian parties, the Free Patriotic Movement and Marada Movement, supported Salam's bid for the premiership but said their decision on whether to give the new cabinet a vote of confidence will depend on its form and principles. Meanwhile, Hezbollah MP Mohammad Raad says his party is seeking a government that would form a frame for cooperation and salvation for all parties. Although the Lebanese forces and the Kataib party nominated Salam, they were at odds when it comes to the type of the next cabinet. Progressive Socialist Party leader MP Walid Jumblat called for a political cabinet, saying he would only accept a national unity government. President Michel Sleiman has called on MPs with whom he met during the day to work on holding a plenary parliament session to discuss issues related to the parliamentary elections. The National News Agency says Sleiman calls for discussing the extension of the deadline to submit for candidacy for the upcoming elections. He also said the plenary session will be an opportunity to discuss and vote a new electoral law. Moving on to Syria, rebels have established footholds in neighborhoods on the edge of Damascus. Activists on the ground say they hope to use such neighborhoods to storm the center of the capital. The Syrian Observatory for Human Rights says today's fighting is concentrated around the town of Al-Tabiya, east of Damascus. The watchdog also says the southern-eastern Damascus suburb of Jamarana has been hit by several mortar rounds, though there were no immediate reports of casualties. Meanwhile, Syrian government warplanes raided a majority Kurdish district in the northern city of Aleppo, killing at least 5 civilians and wounding several others. The area targeted is under control of the Democratic Union Party, Syria's branch of the Kurdistan Workers' Party. The strike comes days after fierce clashes pit Kurdish fighters against troops loyal to President Bashar al-Assad. Syrian President Bashar al-Assad has warned that the fall of his regime will destabilize the region for many years. In an interview with 2 Kurdish media outlets, Assad said the whole world knows that if his regime falls, there will be a domino effect on countries perhaps far from the Middle East, causing instability for many years. Meanwhile, with ongoing battles between rebels and regime forces and a deepening humanitarian crisis, the White House announced that Obama will host regional leaders from Jordan, Turkey, Qatar, and the United Arab Emirates in the coming weeks to discuss the situation in Syria. And still in the Middle East, Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas may fire Prime Minister Salam Fayyad amidst Fatah criticisms that the premier's government is improvised and confused. Abbas's announcement is linked to disagreements over the resignation of Palestine's finance minister, Nabil Assis, which Abbas refused to accept but which Fayyad agreed to. Abbas had informed Fayyad that if Assis did not return to the finance ministry, he would dismiss the current government. This comes a day after the Revolutionary Council officially criticized Fayyad's government for the first time as the Palestinian Authority is facing chronic budget difficulties labeled by ministers as the worst financial crisis since the creation in 1994. Iran and world powers convene for the second and final day of new talks aimed at breaking a decade-old deadlock over Tehran's nuclear drive. The clock is ticking down again on efforts to find a solution. The meeting comes after the two sides held an indecisive first day of negotiations in the Kazakh city of Almaty, which ended with only an agreement to meet again. Western officials admitted the positions were still far apart. They most notably failed to resolve the main issue on whether Iran will accept some demands concerning its nuclear program in return for relief on the sanctions that have hurt the Islamic Republic's economy in the past 2 years. And coming up next, new videos surface on the arrest and trial of James Earl Ray, the man who assassinated Martin Luther King Jr. Stay with us for the story. Welcome back. North Korea has asked foreign countries to consider evacuating their embassies in Pyongyang amidst soaring tensions on the Korean peninsula. The request comes after Pyongyang declared that real conflict was inevitable due to hostile U.S. troop exercises with South Korea and due to UN sanctions imposed over North Korea's nuclear weapons testing. But warnings by the North that nuclear war could break out at any time have not resulted in action, with Germany and Britain among the first to confirm their embassy staff were staying put. The U.S. military responded to the announcement with plans to deploy an unnamed spy plan in Japan to boost surveillance capabilities. White House spokesman Jay Carney says the United States will not be surprised if North Korea were to conduct a new missile test.
We've obviously seen the reports that North Korea may be making preparations to launch a missile, and we're monitoring this situation closely, and we would not be surprised to see them take such an action. We have seen them launch missiles in the past, and the United Nations Security Council has repeatedly condemned them as violations of the North's obligations under numerous Security Council resolutions, and it would fit their current pattern of bellicose, unhelpful, and unconstructive rhetoric and actions. We urge them to stop with the provocations and to focus instead on meeting their international obligations and feeding their own people. They are only making themselves more and more isolated from the rest of the world, as I've been saying all week, and undermining their stated goal of economic development.
And now for news around the world in brief. 72 people were killed after a building in the Indian city of Mumbai collapsed. At least 17 children were among the dead after the two-day rescue operation officially ended. The collapsed building was a 7-story unfinished building, mostly home to laborers working on the site. Police officers said that rescue workers used sledgehammers, chainsaws, and hydraulic jacks to break through the tower of rubble in their search for possible survivors. China's eastern financial hub, Shanghai, closes all markets selling live poultry and slaughters more than 20,000 birds as a new strain of bird flu kills 6 people and infects 16 others. China's authorities and the World Health Organization have stressed there was no sign that the disease can spread between the people, though the outbreak has sparked international concern. Neighboring countries are increasing health checks at airports, while the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention says it has started working on a vaccine if it was needed. Tokyo Electric Power Company says up to 120 tons of highly radioactive water may have leaked out of the crippled Fukushima Daiichi nuclear plant. A TEPCO official could not confirm which elements were thought to have leaked, but said it was highly likely levels exceeded government limits. The leak is the latest in a series of mishaps in recent weeks that has marred the cleanup at the Fukushima Daiichi facility, crippled by 2011's massive earthquake and tsunami. The UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, Navi Pillay, calls for the closure of the Guantanamo prison camp and calls the hunger strike carried out by detainees as a desperate act. Pillay also says the indefinite imprisonment of many detainees without charge or trial violated international law. U.S. President Barack Obama pledged 4 years ago to close the controversial facility, opened by the Bush administration in January of 2002 to hold men captured in counterterrorism operations after the deadly September 11th attack.
I have called for the closure of Guantanamo Bay a long time ago, And in January 2009, I welcomed the Obama administration promise to close Guantanamo Bay and end the indefinite detention, review methods of interrogation that amount to torture. And I felt at the time that he was placing priority on the protection of and safeguarding the rights of the detainees. So I've waited since 2009, and I'm very disappointed to see that instead of honoring that promise, the system of this arbitrary and indefinite detention has continued, and that President Obama, clearly under pressure from the U.S. Congress, has now signed legislation, the last one being in January 2013, called the Defense Authorization Act, which then perpetuates the indefinite detention and refers the matter for administrative review before military commissions.
Former U.S. Secretary of State Hillary Clinton has addressed the 2013 Women in the World Summit, calling for freedom and equality for all women and girls across the globe. During her opening address to the gathering yesterday, Clinton also praised the efforts of young Pakistani schoolgirl Malala Yousafzai, who was shot in the head by the Taliban, for her bravery, and encouraged girls everywhere to stand up for what they believe in. Here's her message.
The fate of women and girls far from here is tied up with the greatest security and economic challenges of our time. Consider Pakistan, a proud country with a rich history that recently marked a milestone in its democratic development when a civilian government completed its first full term for the very first time. And it is no secret that Pakistan is plagued by many ills: violent extremism, sectarian conflict, poverty, energy shortages, corruption, weak democratic institutions. It is a combustible mix, and more than 30,000 Pakistanis have been killed by terrorists in the last decade. The repression of women in Pakistan exacerbates all of these problems. More than 5 million children do not attend school, and 2/3 of them are girls. The Taliban insurgency has made the situation even worse. As Malala has said and reminded us, we live in the 21st century. How can we be deprived from education? She went on to say, I have the right to play. I have the right to sing. I have the right to talk. I have the right to go to market. I have the right to speak up. How many of us here today would have that kind of courage? The Taliban recognized this young girl, 14 at the time, as a serious threat. And you know what? They were right. She was a threat.
45 years after Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated, new video footage has surfaced on his killer, James Earl Ray. The Shelby County of Tennessee released a newly restored footage this week, posting several videos to its website chronicling certain aspects of the assassin's arrest and trial. Ray shot King in the head on April 4th of 1968 in Memphis, Tennessee, before fleeing to Toronto and evading detection. He was ultimately arrested across the Atlantic in London's Heathrow Airport 2 months after the assassination. The most dramatic of the videos shows Ray receiving his Miranda rights on an airplane shortly after his arrest in London in June of 1968. Several hours of unseen footage of Ray's trial in Shelby were also uploaded. And this marks the end of our bulletin for today. Now for a reminder of our headlines. Tamam Slam is nominated Lebanon's Prime Minister designate after receiving 124 votes in the 2-day parliamentary consultations. Syrian President Bashar al-Assad warns the fall of his regime would destabilize the region for decades. And finally, Western nations enter second day and final day on nuclear nuclear talks with Iranian delegates. These were your Saturday headlines from Future TV, live from Beirut. I'm Linda Tamim, wishing you a very nice weekend. Have a great evening.
تسمية النائب الأستاذ فنان سلام.